Hi, this is Dr. Reese. I'm your instructor for Finance 3250. On your screen, you'll see the title page for the Structured Settlement Secondary Market PowerPoint presentation template. On this front page here, you need to enter the names, the first and last names of each of the members in your group. Once you do that, please change this font color from red to black. On the second slide, you don't need to do anything. However, you do need to add some narration that describes J.G. Wentworth. J.G. Wentworth is the company that we're going to use as our example of someone who buys these structured annuities. So when you add your audio narration, so you need to provide a brief description of them. Here we are on slide 3, provide a brief overview of the J.G. Wentworth Company, a description of the transaction. What you're going to do, and I've already included the slides for this, is you're going to walk students through an example of how J.G. Wentworth might buy an annuity that entitles an individual to $12,000 annually for 30 years. So again, you're going to walk the students through a transaction where J.G. Wentworth will buy from an individual an annuity that pays $12,000 annually for 30 years. 2, you'll also identify what proof of ownership of the annuity or structured settlement J.G. Wentworth would require before they would complete this transaction. Slide 4, you're going to identify the amount and timing of all fees associated with completing the purchase of that annuity, and you will identify and summarize any benefits associated with the transaction. So for example, one of the benefits is you get ready cash now. You receive liquidity. You will identify any state or federal regulators who are responsible for monitoring the purchase of these annuities. Now, on this slide, you're going to provide a quick overview of the J.G. Wentworth Company. You identify where the company is located, if the company is privately held or publicly held. That, let me give you all a clue, the company is privately held now, but what you're going to want to figure out is when did the company go from being publicly traded to being privately held? Because the company is privately held, the last date for which you can get asset information is going to be December 30th, 2017. On the company overview on slide 6, you want to identify where the company is headquartered. 2, you want to indicate, is the firm publicly traded or privately held? Spoiler alert, the company is now privately held, but you need to identify when the company went from being publicly traded to being privately held. Because the company is no longer publicly traded and information is not readily available to the investing public, the latest financial data we have for J.G. Wentworth is December 30th, 2017. At that time, they had total assets of $5.05 billion. You need to also confirm that the company began business in 1991. Again, when you provide narration for this slide number 7, you need to provide that information. All right, now we're on slide 8. You're going to provide a description of the transaction. Now, in this case, I have laid out the transaction you're going to review. You're going to review a transaction where J.G. Wentworth purchases an annuity. That annuity pays $12,000 a year annually for 30 years and is owned by an individual. The individual wants a lump sum payment. In your narration on this slide, you need to indicate what, if any, identification or proof of ownership is required by J.G. Wentworth before they will entertain this transaction. Now, the length of the transaction will be approximately 30 to 45 days. You want to confirm that that is still true. 2, the fees associated with completing this transaction can run anywhere from 9% to 15% on the lump sum amount. And 3, Chapter 12 of Title 51 of the Official Code of Georgia is the major state regulation which obtains or which governs this transaction. You want to confirm that this is still true, and you also want to determine if that title has been amended, if it has already been amended by House Bill 443. If so, you need to update the information on this slide to indicate that. Now, let's talk about the amount and timings of fees on slide 10. Time required to sell the structured settlement. Again, you want to confirm that it's 30 to 45 days. And again, I have a note here in red font in the final version of the slide. Please remove this after you have confirmed the number of days it takes to complete the transaction. 2, you want to identify the total fees and charges to sell the structured annuity J.G. Wentworth. Now here, I have created a table that estimates the payout based upon the discount rate that J.G. Wentworth uses. So you should provide narration for this. Now, over the course of the life of this annuity, the individual is due to collect $360,000 if you don't adjust for time value of money. If J.G. Wentworth typically is going to use a discount rate between 12 and 18%, the table above gets a representative example. The table on slide 12 provides a representative example of what the payout would be using those various discount rates. Slide 13 identifies what the cash payout would be as a percentage of the total amount of money that the individual would have been entitled to receive if they had not sold the annuity, if they had held on to the annuity. Now, on slide 14, again, you want to confirm the typical time required to sell a structured annuity. Is it 30 to 45 days? 2, you want to summarize what documentation is required of J.G. Wentworth before they're willing to enter into this kind of purchase. 3, you want to identify you want to determine if this process is convenient for individuals who would like to sell. On slide 15, we identify the regulators who are responsible for overseeing this type of activity. At the federal level, it's the Justice Department. Do you want to confirm that? At the state level, it's Georgia State. And at the local level, you want to identify if there are any local entities who are responsible for supervising this. Now, we've identified the federal laws that apply. You just want to confirm that they are true, still true. State laws that apply, again, Chapter 12, Title 51. Please note that this law may have been amended already. You want to confirm if it has been amended by House Bill 443 and how that impacts the major provisions of the law. Again, in the state of Florida, since we're right on the Georgia-Florida border, you want to identify what state regulations impact this kind of activity. And in this case, there are no local regulators either in the state of Georgia or the state of Florida who are responsible for supervising or overseeing this activity. If you have some personal insights as a result, you should share those. As we identify the applicable federal and state regulations for this activity, we want to keep in mind the overriding goals or objectives of bank regulation, of which there are 2 main objectives. As we seek to understand and explain these bank regulations, we want to identify, well, what is the primary goal or motivation behind this bank regulation, of which, again, there can be one of 2. The second thing we want to do is identify what mechanisms this bank regulation employs to achieve its ends. And again, there are 5 major mechanisms that bank regulations typically employ. So again, we want to understand what those mechanisms might be for the particular regulation of this activity and provide a brief description of that in the narrated overview. It may be helpful as you think about and describe the regulation of these various alternative financial services to think about the objectives and mechanics of various bank regulations. There is a separate video in which I discuss the objectives and mechanics of bank regulation. It would be helpful to watch that video as you prepare your bank regulation presentations. Happy studying!